Minnesota's a championship ultimate city now. That is their new identity. We'll see how they handle it.
They're going to be battle tested, and they're going to get every single game brought to them this season. This is what you want. If you want to grow up, if you want to level up, then welcome to the show.
Chicago has no doubt of talent. It's just how quickly will it all get there?
In a single offseason, you can transform your potential as a team.
Team shot with the layout block in crunch time.
Team shot going up. Snyder versus Goff. Oh, goodness. Quinn Snyder changing the game.
That was phenomenal stuff.
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner. That is Evan Lepler. We are bringing you the latest from around the UFA, and with 3 weeks behind us and week 4 in front of us, Evan, we've really hit the prove it time of this 2025 season. It feels like we've got enough data to start drawing some conclusions, and yet we still have this fantastically wide open field of championship contenders. We got Oakland and Philadelphia off to the hottest starts in the league. But now, again, with this upcoming slate, it feels like we're getting into the real meat of the schedule. I mean, we've got New York at Boston on Friday night, Chicago at Minnesota in the debut of this highly anticipated Chicago Union team facing the former champions. Where are you kind of focused as we really dig into, again, this sort of, I think, action we've all been expecting?
Yeah, it's hard to decide what to focus on. Like the sentence that you just said in the open, Oakland and Philadelphia are the hottest teams in the league. Like let's go back in time and redo the preseason commentary, because we did not forecast the Spiders and Phoenix being in this spot. And you're right, it is something of a prove it weekend. And at the end of the season, we're going to look back at week 4 and playoff berths, home field advantage, that type of thing will be decided based upon what happens this weekend with 2 results in Atlanta between the Flyers and the Hustle. You know, the Glory play not just the Empire on Friday, but the DC Breeze on the road on Sunday. New York also has a sneaky tough back-to-back at Montreal, and we can talk about what happened last Friday night. It was not a straightforward victory for the New York Empire. They really had to work hard to get that win in the 4th. You know, Colorado going to Texas. I know you're excited to call the Madison-Pittsburgh game. Can the Thunderbirds finally win at Breese Stevens Field? How good are both of those teams? Like, both Pittsburgh for sure has had a pretty soft schedule. Madison, has looked okay when they've played. They didn't play well at Austin, obviously, in the first quarter. So, yeah, it's going to be a really fun weekend, and I'm excited to return to Boston for the rematch of the playoff game last year where Jeff Babbitt made that play. And I rewatched that game before the season opener that New York played out in Oakland, and That game, Adam, is still one of the craziest games, I think, in the history of the league. Like, maybe not the most well-played, but just the number of twists and turns and momentum swings and wow moments. And we get to see Boston and New York again. And, there's a roadmap where New York could go 0-2 on the road this weekend and be sitting at 2-3. Like, the Empire have issues they need to sort out. Were you able to catch a good chunk of that game last Friday against Montreal? And what are you expecting from New York as they hit the road at Boston, at Montreal?
Look, I don't think that there is another team that plays the Empire as confidently over the last few seasons as the Royale. Now, they haven't notched any victories, but man, they've had a couple of close calls that actually kind of resembles the dynamic between DC and Philadelphia before the Phoenix finally broke through in week 1 earlier this season, where it's like, man, if a couple of these possessions break in Montreal's favor, this is a radically different result. I mean, New York perseveres. They get the 22-20 win. Calvin Brown looks fantastic in his debut in the pinstripes for New York. They had that big connection to open the third quarter with him bombing it deep to Beignet, and you go, yep, that's the vision. That's why you signed this guy to this roster. That is the exact kind of duo that this New York Empire has been searching for since they lost Osgar and Jeff Babbitt, 2 MVPs, right? But yeah, this Royale team against New York, don't sleep on them. You know, I'm writing about it right now in the power rankings set to come out for this week. The offensive playmaking and throwing specifically of Christophe Tremblay-Jonca, Jakob Brissett, and Kevin Quinlan can power this team to some pretty potent offensive attacks. You know, like Quinton Bernard in one-on-one downfield is still one of the best receivers in the association. This Montreal team has pieces to punch with pretty talented rosters. They just don't have the consistency to win games yet, particularly facing the schedule that they do in that East Division. Again, they have to now play a Philadelphia team that is undefeated too, in addition to the DCs, the Bostons, the New Yorks, and the rebooted Rush, right? But yeah, I mean, these slates of games coming up, kind of getting back to a more general point, it really is kind of establishing where the rubber meets the road. We came into the season, as you were talking about at the top of this episode, expecting, you know, certain teams to be at the top of the standings. That is not the case heading into week 4. I mean, even Pittsburgh, who's coming here to the Capital City Ultimate this Saturday to partake in the Radicals home opener, you know, they sit at 2-0 atop the Central Division standings. Obviously, scheduling quirk plays a heavy hand in them summiting the standings this early in the season. But to their credit, they look polished, and I think that they're going to be ready to come in with this big road game here in Madison and do some work. Now, will they finally get the monkey off their back and get their first ever win here on the Isthmus? We'll see. But yeah, I mean, there's matchups up and down the schedule, both this weekend and in upcoming weeks that just, again, we came into 2025, I think, having certain assumptions and thinking certain ways. And each week it's like a new relearning, right? Of what we previously held and what we need to, I think, establish going forward. Like, there is going to be a lot to watch for and how these matchups play out and who kind of showcases their strengths. I think that has been what has been so evident with the successful teams so far, and the Oaklands and Philadelphias and even like the Atlantas, right? Like they, you know what those teams are about. Philadelphia, they're going to play hard defense and they've got real playmakers on offense. Oakland, they're probably the fastest scoring unit in the entire UFA right now. Atlanta, probably the most polished team on both sides of the disc. And it's just like, now we have all these matchups to clarify, where do these other teams kind of scatter out?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I think, you know, on my personal power rankings, I would have Atlanta number 1 right now, just from what they've looked like on both sides of the disc. And yes, they needed a buzzer beater.
I'll be quick. Like, I agree with you in a certain sense too. Like, sometimes my power rankings, I think, are more an auspice of, you know, data we've already collected rather than forward thinking. I think if we were to do like a potentiality power rankings, you know, like which team has the greatest chance of winning the championship, I think I would agree with you. Atlanta is like number 1 right now, but mine kind of have a little bit more of a retrograde flavor. And I think that's where I get in contention with some people on my rankings.
Yeah, I'm usually one of the people that you get in contention with, which is fine. Yeah, I mean, look, you have had Minnesota all number 1 all preseason, and they've got like the highest point diff in the league right now after playing just 1 game. So shout out to Ben Feldman and Justin Burnett getting 4 blocks in his wind chill debut. It'll be a much tougher test this weekend. And I mean, I'm just really excited to see what the atmosphere looks like at Seafoam Stadium, their first game back after winning a championship, marquee opponent. Hopefully the weather works out for them and they get a nice day, and, you know, it's a really good game. And, you know, Chicago, like you and I have talked all preseason, what is this Chicago team going to look like week to week? Well, their roster for this first game of the year: no Nate Goff, no Tim Schock, no Victor Luo, no Paul Arders. So, you know, they still have a lot of really good players. I counted 9 guys in their active 20 that weren't on the team last year for Chicago. including guys making their return like Kyle Rutledge and Pavel Giannis, and then guys joining the team for the first time like Xavier Payne and William Wettengel and Brandon Van Dusen, like Simon Dastrup. They've got a really good team on paper, but what are they going to look like when they actually play? Not just, they don't get a tune-up against Indy or Detroit. They face the champs, who look really crisp and hungry and focused in week one. So, I think this Minnesota team, I mean, we said it at championship weekend last year, Adam, like they were ahead of schedule winning it all last year. They really were. Yeah. When you look at how young they were and just how the circumstances conspired in their favor, I expect this Minnesota team to be better this year than they were last year. They have all the pieces in place to do that. And, it's just going to be a heck of an atmosphere Saturday. But there's going to be a lot of great atmospheres this week, like Colorado going into triple-digit heat in Texas, especially against Austin on the second day of a back-to-back. Steven Nagy told me he's hoping it's like 130 degrees because, he doesn't mind the heat and he wants the Summit to have to wear it. There's a lot of Texas players on that Summit team that used to play for either Dallas or Austin or Houston that are coming back to Lone Star State. So, there's so many storylines around the league. And, I am curious to get you to hone in on the Boston-New York game and, just trying to gauge what your expectations are. Because after last Friday, I got to say, I saw some red flags with New York. I got some red flags with the Empire. And if you said to me right now, who's going to be on the outside of the playoffs in the East? I may regret this, but I don't think New York's a lock playoff team right now. Not even close with what I've seen from them through the first 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, we've been talking about this since the end of last year too, right? When this Boston team unceremoniously decapitated them in the first round of the playoffs using their former big man himself and Jeff Babbitt. The kind of storybook poetry that this rivalry has fulfilled is pretty astonishing, quite frankly. We've been wanting this New York-Boston regional sports firework to go off since Boston joined the league in 2021. And for those first couple of seasons, they had some close results. And there's stars on both teams, but it's sort of like one of those big air quotes rivalry games where New York's just winning every single matchup they go out there. And it wasn't until last year and Babbitt sort of becoming a turncoat from his former franchise in New York that we really got, I think, the edge that this, again, New York, Boston, kind of a cross sports contentiousness truly has a potential for it. And since that has happened, we've gotten just amazing game after amazing game. They met 3 times last year, ends with Boston eliminating New York from the postseason. As you pointed out very nicely in this week's Tuesday toss, it was the first time New York has exited the playoffs before championship weekend since 2017? 2017? 8 years ago, for the Glory to come in and do that to the Empire. And now we get this matchup coming up on Friday. I think it's all to say that there's a lot more riding on this Friday game for New York than there is for Boston. I think, the logistics of New York already has a loss. Boston sits at 2-0 is at the top of that. But beyond it, what you're kind of referencing too, which is that this New York team, it still has its moments, right? It still has that Jack Williams flair. Again, that Calvin Brown to Ben Yot deep connection, some nice defensive, I think, aggressive in transition break scores for the Empire D-line. And yet they couldn't create separation from the Royale, which is a team they used to kind of pummel a lot over the past couple of years. And now they've got to go into Boston and face this Glory squad that is, frankly, I think currently the most talented roster in the entire UFA. And I think that they have the 2 best players in the division, if not the league as a whole, in Jeff Babbitt and Toba DeCrana. DeCrana is insane this year, by the way, in his second year as a professional. The evolution he keeps making almost point to point as a complete ultimate player is astonishing at this point. Like,
Let me ask you a quick follow-up though. You
Sure.
just said you think Boston has the most talented roster in the UFA. Are
Yeah.
you talking about what we've seen so far? Or are you talking about like when they add in all the college guys who haven't played for them yet?
Yeah. I think both currently they have the most talented roster, and they're still figuring out where they're going to piece in some even more talented collegiate additions after they wrap up their postseason schedule. Look, I mean, we haven't even really touched on this show the addition of Calvin Stoughton, coming over from a Colorado team where he was an A1 playmaker for a Summit squad that has a roster full of them. He comes over to Boston, has now been implemented as kind of a two-way player, giving them an addition alongside Peter Borth, who will join this Glory roster in a few weeks. I mean, the down lineup playmaking that this Boston squad can currently throw at teams is stupefying. I mean, you've got to deal with just the imposing level of athleticism and height that they can throw at you with Babbitt, Tanner Johnson-Go, Ryan Cable, these monsters who can just sort of eat up in space. But then there's all this speed and sort of, I don't know, like they can just zero in on a matchup and say, we want to win that with this player and start doing that. That's what I've seen from Boston in their first two games against Montreal. We'll see if it'll hold against New York, but Boston looks like a beast this year.
Couple thoughts. Number one, like, normally I'd say, oh, well, New York's a big step up of competition compared to Montreal. Well, Montreal looked pretty comparable to New York, frankly, watching them in New York last Friday night. So, I mean, I think Boston deserves to be viewed as a favorite in this game. But you mentioned Calvin Stoughton. He's inactive this weekend. The Glory are also missing Ryan Dinger. So Dinger and Stoughton are their leaders in completions, number 1 and 2, through 2 games. Benjamin Sadok missed game 2, so he's the leader in completions per game. But like Dinger and Stoughton have got a lot of touches, and Boston's O-line is going to look different without those 2 guys in particular, especially Stoughton, who, I'm with you. He's a really good addition. Currently second on the team in goals or assists, tied for third in the team in goals. I was chatting with Sam Rosenthal, the coach of the Glory, this morning, and I mean, he just kind of ran through all of the college guys that are going to be joining the team at some point in the next few months. But there's also U24 that a lot of those guys will be playing. But like, there's like a line and a half of guys that the Glory can just kind of think about slotting in when they're available. Now, that's like really good news for your depth and talent. But this game counts as much as the game in June does. And there's not always the most easy, seamless slotting of a guy back in when they come out. Like if someone slots in, then someone has to slot out. And what does that do to team chemistry? And are you slotting out someone who's been a core guy for the team, but they're getting replaced by, a younger Wyatt Kellman or Benjamin Horaceberger? Like there's a lot of ramifications that I think this Boston team is going to need to work out. I agree with you that they're really talented. I don't know if I'd say that they're more talented than the Atlanta team that I've watched so far this year. I don't know. Maybe you think Atlanta's more system-based and like they've got their thing and they do it well. But I look at how
I think
decisive Atlanta's been. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. No, I'm interrupting you. And my only point is that I think Atlanta's system is more developed and has more showy parts to it. But I think we really need to tune our attentions to what this Glory team has been doing now for over a season, which is possessing the disc better than any other team in the association. You talk about kind of meta-analysis and what numbers mean the most in this game. It still comes down to, and shout out Daniel Cohen, fewest turnovers, right? And there's been no team better than Boston over the past, 16 odd months at doing that. 14, I should say. And I just think that, you can say like, oh, they'll be down Dinger and Stoughton. Well, they'll return Ben Sadok, who is not active this past weekend and one of the top passers over the past several seasons in the entire league. And I just think that Boston plays so conservatively that it doesn't really matter if they swap a piece here or there. They're still going to have, an ability to finish to a Jeff Babbitt or a Simon Carapella downfield. They're still going to have just, I think, a basic level of fundamentals and not getting out over their skis where, minor roster adjustments won't make too much of a change for their playing style. But I hear you. I think it's something to watch as we progress in the season of how many different Boston lineups can they sort of self-sustain, right? Like how much change is too much week to week.
Yeah. Now's probably not the time for this, but it'd be interesting to go like position group by position group. Atlanta's O-line handlers versus Boston's O-line, like Boston's O-line cutters versus Atlanta's, and just do that side-by-side comparison and see where we landed.
And here's honestly where I'm a little concerned in this matchup is which New York defense are we going to get? As we were just talking about that Friday night game last weekend, Empire struggled to slow down the Royale attack a lot, even with the rain kind of as an assist or an eighth defender. What do you think about New York's defense, the losses it sustained over the offseason, and how it's looked so far in 2025?
I think it looks very different than it did a year ago. Part of that is personnel based. Part of that is guys getting a year older. And part of that is just kind of early season figuring out who they are. Antoine Davis doesn't look like the same guy that he was at championship weekend a couple of years ago. And that's in some ways to be expected. But I think it was you that shared an Instagram post that Antoine had where he talked about like how his life priorities are changing a little bit. He still cares about Frisbee, but like for so much of his life, it was Frisbee and then everything else. And now it's like family and his business and Frisbee. And he still cares about it, but it's, I feel like you kind of see that from him on the field. Like I would still want him on my team, but I don't think you count on him to be the game-changing behemoth that he was for New York in their run to the 2023 championship. So, yeah, there's an evolution going on with this New York team right now, and we're seeing guys kind of bounce back and forth between O and D. They're relying on a bunch of young guys. They did add Tristan Yarger back onto the roster. He's not active right now, but I mean, he was a guy that New York's first championship back in 2019 when Tristan was just 18 years old in high school. Like he played at championship weekend and played well and threw the swing that led to the Marquez Brownlee iconic layout in the backfield that kind of swung the game. So yeah, I think that's a great point about the New York defense. And I have questions about their offense too. Like obviously Calvin Brown looked good and helped a lot, but there's still not quite the synchronicity that we've gotten used to with this New York team in the past. And there's a reason for that. Like it is a very different team. But they're going to be tested more this weekend, theoretically, than they have been yet. And we'll see how they respond.
Yeah. It's that old saying kind of goes around bankruptcy, slowly and then all at once. That's sort of how it's felt with this Empire defense where, you look at it coming into this year and you go, yeah, there are some pretty important retirements that happened with the Dross going away and Aloro and Breton Tan taking time away from the team. Those are pretty noticeable names. But at the same time, they're still returning Antoine. They've got John Randolph, Marquez Brownlee's here. We trust their system. They always kind of bring in a few young guys that are exciting. They've got Everest Shapiro and Oliver Fay coming over in free agency. And yet, it's not the same sort of dog pound that it once was, right? I mean, that 2023 championship Empire team, on defense, they used to just harass teams in the backfield when it was Brownlee and Randolph and Tan just sort of swarming opposing throwers and making even resets just perilous to try to complete.
Think about what Antoine Davis did to Kyle Henke and Jordan Kerr at that championship weekend. He eliminated them.
Yeah. Yeah, you get the disc out of the shadow of your own end zone and you're punting it downfield to Antoine, who is just in complete beast mode, winning championship weekend MVP that year, And now you remove a couple of those pieces and it's just chinks in the armor, right? Like it's not the same strong presented front it once was. And I worry about that, especially against this Boston team that is so good in one-on-one scenarios and establishing, okay, that's the weak point we can go attack. Let's go at it. Again, like this Boston team doesn't really do anything super sexy. They're not going to just do the lights and fireworks show that I think you talk about with Atlanta, and that I agree shows them to be the premier offense in this league. But Boston just gets it done, man. And
Yeah.
I worry about it against this young and developing Empire D-line.
New York lost Ben Katz 2 years ago. They lose Mike and Ryan Drost from last year. They lose Brett and Tan, who's perhaps not a name we've talked about, but like
Human pair of handcuffs.
Elite handler defender. Connor Russell, Jeff Holm, really underrated D-line guy who obviously played some offense for the Empire last year, but he was super reliable and they just trusted him. And I think this is a New York team that's building trust right now. They don't have it. Now, I think they've got a good coaching staff with Nunez and Stevens and a lot of experience in solving problems. But the other thing, Adam, about bringing in new guys, like you mentioned, Shapiro from LA and Shepard from Pittsburgh and Oliver Fay from Austin, like LA, Pittsburgh, and Austin. I say this with respect, but what have those franchises done? They've made some runs. Yeah, I do. But there's a different expectation in New York. There's a different expectation of excellence than compared to what those guys have just lived through their other professional ultimate experiences. And that's a different pressure. It's a different vibe. And you don't just show up to a new place and slot into Ryan Osgar's role or Charles Weinberg's role or John Lithio's role and do exactly what they can do. So yeah, we're seeing an evolution to a new version of the Empire, and it's a prove it weekend for them, because if they're not careful, they're going to be 2-3 at the end of this weekend, and on the outside of looking in of the toughest division in the league.
Yeah, I mean, we'll really have to wait and see, I think, with a lot of these results before we start prognosticating what the records are going to be in a couple of days. Because, yeah, they could be 2-3, and yet if they get a win and then Boston, drops the game on Friday, waits a day, and then goes to DC on Sunday and drops the game to the Breeze, they could fall from 2-0 to 2-2 very quickly.
Absolutely. And New York could be 4-1 at the end of the weekend too.
Yep.
They could absolutely put it together because they have the talent to do it.
And here's another point to that. You mentioned Shep. They get Calvin Brown in his debut, looking how he should for this team. Suddenly, this New York deep attack has come alive. They complete 9 of 12 hucks against Montreal on Friday night. And there's a little bit more of a verve and a rhythm with this Empire attack that has been sorely lacking, I think, for several games now. And yeah, if they kind of continue to take, the bulletin board material we are providing, and I think plenty of other teams and opponents are doing, and just saying, hey, this Empire team's kind of fallen off, New York still has enough there to really make a run this year. Again, as we keep saying, this field is wide open. And I think with that, we should shift our attention to the Game of the Week showcase on Saturday night, the Central Division showdown between the reigning champion Minnesota Wind Chill, making their home opener debut at Seafoam Stadium in 2025, and hosting the Chicago Union, now retooled with Pavlianis and a bunch of other returning pieces from their 2022 championship game appearance team, as well as some really interesting free agency additions. You touched on Van Dusen, Dastrip, Wettengel, as well as the top European talent in Don Marais. And given how the Europeans have been performing so far in the schedule, I really expect him to go off on Saturday night in that kind of format. But what are you looking at in this Union versus Winchell game? As you mentioned earlier in the episode, Winchell got a 32-17 win on the road at Indianapolis last weekend. So they've gotten their gears oiled a bit. Chicago's still looking to get off the starting blocks here. It'll be interesting to see how those two energies meet in this really, I think, important rivalry game.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of easy excuses for Chicago if things don't go well. Like, oh, it's our first game. We have all these new pieces. They're the reigning champs. It's their home opener. Great energy. Like, there's a lot of easy excuses for the Union if they come out and don't look crisp and look sloppy and just don't have the polish that you would expect them to. So that's really what I'm looking for. Is like, are we going to hear those excuses afterwards, or are they going to look like they're ready to compete for a championship in week 4, but in their week 1? Because as you and I have discussed many times, they don't get warm-up games. They got at Minnesota, home for Atlanta, their first 2 games of the season this weekend and then 2 weeks from now. So, yeah, and I think Minnesota, like, they were 3-3 at home last year, isn't that right? Like, they won the championship after going 3-3 at home with losses to Pittsburgh, Chicago, and New York. All beat them in the regular season in the Twin Cities. So this is a Winchell team that really wants to hold down their home field, and I think they're going to do it. But I also think, like, this is a rivalry game, and this is a real rivalry where they go back and forth and they ebb and flow. And I mean, we've seen both teams win on the other's home field with late game moments being the difference. So yeah, this is just one of the many awesome games this weekend that I'm really excited to see. When I talked to Dave Woods and Charlie First, the co-head coaches of the Union, about 3-4 weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, like, they hadn't had a full team practice yet. So they would not commit to who's going to be where. Is Pavel going to be, an O-line handler, or what is he going to be? And just kind of what the roles are going to be. Because you could envision, Xavier Payne orchestrating the offense. There's a lot of different avenues to success, but I don't know what buttons they're going to push. Like Brandon Van Dusen, if he's healthy, he could orchestrate the offense. Do you have a sense of what they're going to look like?
I'll tell you what isn't going to be an avenue for success is kind of playing this potpourri game of who's going to play where. Like, I think that Chicago better have a pretty damn good sense of what their game plan is going against this Winchell defense. Like, this is how Minnesota took advantage of everyone at championship weekend last year, was this kind of, we'll sort of make adjustments off of the wind chill as the game goes along. That's not how you play this Minnesota team well. The Union got a good 25-20 win against Minnesota at Seafoam Stadium at the end of last year's regular season matchup because the Union came in with a solid offensive plan. They knew exactly where they wanted to attack. They got Jack Shanahan out into space, and they were ripping hucks from their continuation sets to wide open receivers in one-on-one matchups. If they're going to be tinkering in their lineups and sort of figuring out what needs to happen later in the season, I think Minnesota might kind of run it up on Chicago in the first quarter. Because again, they got momentum coming off of a 15-goal win in Indy last weekend. Their new pieces in Justin Burnett and James Pollard have come to play for the reigning champs. And this is a team that returned 95% plus of its championship roster from last year. Everyone knows what to expect in the land of 10,000 lakes, and they're going to be playing in front of a really fired up home crowd. I think that, yeah, to your point, Union can come in and lay as many excuses as they want on the table, and we can buy all of them. This is their first game, it's an unfavorable matchup, whatever. I'm just here to say, if that is the approach, and if it's going to be a lot of sort of lineup experimentation, this game could get kind of ugly quick. Like, I don't think that talent will just hold out against Cameron Lacey and Sam Berglund pulling on the back line over and over with pulls. Excuse me. Sam Berglund, I think, is listed as questionable right now on the roster lineup. But James Pollard, whoever it is, pulling the disc for Minnesota, just winning field position battle, possession after possession, as Chicago, figures out how to bring all the cars out of their garage, so to speak. Again, like there is so
Adam,
much.
there's also a world where Don DeMarais is the best player on the field in his
No
first ever
question.
UFA game and finishes with like 7 goals and 5 assists, and Chicago wins by 3. I could see that happening too.
Yeah, and that's my point, is like I hope Chicago kind of knows what they want to do coming in. If their game plan is to just throw the keys at Don DeMarais and say, hey, go have one out there against this wind chill defense, like I think that is a good strategy. I just don't think that if Chicago is going to be, deploying multiple different kinds of handler sets on offense, that is a winning strategy against this Minnesota team that is, again, game planning, coming out of the offseason, specifically knowing what they want to do going in against the Union.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sam Berglund being questionable. Dylan DeClercq is also questionable. Yeah. Those are 2 important pieces for the wind chill D-line. DeClercq is a cutter defender. Like you could picture Dylan chasing around Don DeMarais, getting physical with him. If they don't have DeClercq, that's a big loss.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely one of the things to look out for in this game. And I think in general, whoever can own the midfield with Chicago on offense and Minnesota on defense, I think will hold the leverage in this game. Again, in their last matchup last year, felt like the Union O really owned that space. It was Shanahan, it was Jeff Weiss, it was Dex Draymond too, kind of running up into power position and just yeeting hucks downfield that really, I think, made that into the shootout that it was, with Chicago putting up 25 goals on the road. If Chicago can make it that sort of matchup again, like you're saying, turn it into the Don DeMarais debut and showcase hour, like that's a winning strategy. But if they're going to be kind of thinking forward to later in the season and seeing where everything fits, I think that's going to come up with a big W for the home team.
Adam, in Pavel's last 2 regular seasons as a member of the Chicago Union, he played 4 total D points. Does he play more than that on Saturday at Minnesota?
I honestly don't know at this point. I know all offseason he was crowing about he wasn't going to play.
Playing coy.
It just feels like, yeah, sure, buddy. Like, until I see it, I really can't believe it. I mean, especially in this environment, especially given this opponent, if we don't see 5-5 out there taking the first centering pass for the Union offense alongside Brandon Van Dusen, I would be kind of stunned. But, again, the Chicago team has so many pieces to play with. It'll be interesting to see where they put them all. You got Henry Goldenberg and Dylan Nice, who we haven't mentioned yet, who I think could be really positive contributing factors on an offensive attack, if not in this game, then at some point down the line for this team, depending on if they play on that side of the ball. It's just, again, it's sort of like, where are the Union going to deploy everyone? Where is sort of the puzzle going to come together for this team and win?
Yeah, and to get back to kind of where we started this conversation, like we know more or less what the wind chill are going to look like in this game, how they're going to align their guys, who's going to be doing what. Like, we have no idea for Chicago, despite the fact that they've got so many accomplished players. And my question is, like, do they know? Are they really confident in what they're going to do? Or are they going to go into it like, we'll try this, and if it doesn't work, then we'll flex it to this? Like, how committed are they to what their game plan is for the first quarter? And how is it going to mesh against a team that will be ready for them in a way that, it's just going to be an abrupt start to the season for the Union in terms of, their practice time against each other and now going to play the champs in their home opener. But there's a reason that the NFL makes a big deal about the champion, like, kind of playing their big kickoff game, the first game of the season. And I know we don't do it exactly like that in the UFA, but like, there is something special for Minnesota coming off their first championship, their first game back home. They've done a great job building a fan base, and I'm disappointed that I can't be there on Saturday because it's going to be a heck of a scene at Seafoam.
Absolutely. And I think you're honestly touching on an important piece of this too, which is that maybe there is a little too much expectation for the home team coming into this matchup. What if things go a little bit awry at the beginning and Chicago does go on a run and, these new talented acquisitions for the Union showcase their abilities immediately, and all of a sudden there's a stunned crowd and not a roaring crowd. Like, I think that kind of psychological element will have a big factor in this game too.
It's possible, but they also were 3-3 in 6 home games last year. So, there's, and I don't they didn't get booed off the field in those games. It's not that type of crowd, at least yet.
It's not Philly, Sorry, Philly. You have a reputation in the general sports world for that.
Do you have any other thoughts on Chicago, Minnesota, or do you want to move to either Pittsburgh, Madison, or Carolina, Atlanta?
Just one additional kind of matchup to watch for. You mentioned Goff will not be in the lineup for the Union. On the flip side, Quinn Snyder will be making his 2025 debut for the Wind Chill. He figures to be their wide receiver 1 whenever he's active in the lineup. And he's just a handful no matter what kind of defensive lineup you've got going on your side of the disc. And I think that, again, with Goff missing, it'll be interesting to see who the Union put on Snyder to try to slow him down, because he really heats up in some of these showcase matchups. He was big for the Wind Chill in their championship weekend push to close out last season. I expect him to have, 4+ goals, I would say, by the end of this game.
Interesting. Yeah, you say wide receiver 1, and I think you're right about Snyder, but man, Gordon Larson is growing into a really good player.
Yeah.
I mean, he had 6 assists in the first game. He could have called him the championship weekend MVP last year with what he did in Salt Lake City. Minnesota's a good, balanced, deep team with great buy-in. And, do they have the top end that other teams have, I think, is the question about them. Can they match up with a Boston or an Atlanta, in tranquil conditions? That, I think, is still a fair question to ask. But, I'm sure they believe the answer is yes. And hopefully we'll get a chance to see it in 2 weeks when they take on Atlanta. That's going to be fun.
But first, this Saturday's Game of the Week matchup. I mean, you're getting ahead again. You always want to go to the next weekend. But we should pick our next matchup, either the South Division back-to-back between Carolina and Atlanta. That'll be, again, on Saturday, both a makeup game from the postponed Week 3 matchup between the Hustle and the Flyers, as well as a regularly scheduled Week 4 showcase. Or excuse me, I said Week 3. Week 2 postponed game between the Hustle and the Flyers, as well as a regularly scheduled Week 4 matchup. So they will have 1.5 games about this coming Saturday. But then there's also this Colorado-Texas road trip. There's Boston and DC on Sunday. Where does your mind wander right now?
Well, I want to talk for a minute about Carolina, because I saw them play in person this past Saturday against DC. And I think, the DC Breeze played their best game of the season. Certainly offensively, that was the case. And the Flyers lacked a little punch. Now, they didn't play poorly by any means. I think they finished with 11 or 12 turnovers for the game. You would take that almost any game. So I don't want to throw up panic signals for Carolina, even if they lose both games this weekend and fall to 0-3. We've seen them start seasons slowly and play better ultimate and win a championship a year where they started slow. But with what we saw last weekend, they just struggled to slow DC down and really create a lot of pressure. And to their credit, they tried a bunch of different things. They tried the sideline pull with a double team, and they tried the sideline pull without the double team, and they did different things with their marks. And I liked watching them kind of run through all the different weapons that they had. And for the most part, DC was we can handle that weapon. And Atlanta is similar to DC in terms of an offense that A, has firepower, and B, has great chemistry and kind of knows what it wants to do when it's on the field. So obviously Atlanta's offensive style is different from DC, but they're really good at what they do. So I'm curious to see if Carolina can generate a little bit more pressure. And, obviously they were 3 for 3 on break chances, but 3 break chances is not going to get it done against anybody, let alone one of the better teams in the league like DC or Atlanta. So, yeah, they were missing guys, and it was early, their first official game. But that was my thought watching Carolina. It was like they didn't have the same punch to their defense that I've been used to. And even their offense, they did a good job taking care of the disc, but like Fairfax didn't have a great game. Frankly, Grayson Sanner bailed the Carolina offense out a couple of times on like 50-50 shots where he made crazy athletic grabs, and awesome for Grayson. Doing it on the same field where, not the same field, but I mean, this was a long time ago, but like there's that infamous point where Xavier Maxtad kind of told Grayson Sanner at UNC Wilmington to take an injury to get someone else on the field. And now Maxtad is an assistant coach for DC, and Grayson Sanner is skying the world for the Flyers. It's just a fun, random, cool dynamic that I enjoyed and made a subtle reference to during the broadcast. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this Carolina team evolves starting this weekend. I think Atlanta knows who they are. I think Carolina is still figuring that out.
Yeah, I wanted to get back a second. I thought you were making a really good point about the DC and Atlanta offenses, the two teams that Carolina has had to go against so far. I don't disagree with your points that the Flyers D-line lacks a little bit of teeth, their ability to just have some stopping power against these elite offenses, but I don't know that there's two better units at what you were kind of describing and what I would say is like problem solving, their ability to figure out different kinds of coverages. There's not two teams with better offenses at problem solving defenses than DC and Atlanta. I think that's often maybe what we often talk about when we say balance as well. Like they're good in the red zone. They can kind of stretch the field out. I think you saw that last weekend against Carolina with this DC attack. They weren't necessarily finishing all their hucks in the end zone, but there were so many times when Monroe or Boxley are outpacing coverage and sort of setting up easy, fast break scores downfield for the Breeze offense to cash in on in the red zone. And it's like when Atlanta and DC are in their rhythms, it feels impossible for almost any defense to kind of stay in front of them. And I think that that's sort of what the Flyers have struggled with so far, is just the caliber of their opponents have been so fantastic that it's kind of hard to get a read on, was this Flyers defense sort of slipping a little, or are they just getting the season going against two of the best there are?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely fair. But the reality is so many of these top teams have put together schedules where you're playing a tough game almost every week. And for Carolina, after these 2 games against Atlanta, they got San Diego at home. Then they travel to play Philly and Pittsburgh. Like, you think Carolina's the favorite in those games just based upon track record, but who knows? Philly and Pittsburgh could still both be undefeated when they face the Flyers the end of May or beginning of June. And then, and then Carolina has to play Atlanta again, and Atlanta could be 8-0 at that time. So yeah, I just think like you're right. They've played the two of the 4 or 5 best offenses in the league, and 4 or 5 may be conservative, might be the top 2. Oakland has certainly looked really good through the first 3 weeks of the season. They're off this weekend, so we're not focusing on a Spiders game. But Oakland's offense through 3 weeks, wow, they are really, really fun to watch and really, really smooth about what they do. But yeah, I think, Carolina is not a team that's going to be like, oh, well, we've played DC and Atlanta, so we're going to do it against Austin and Houston. Like, no, they're used to getting the job done against these top teams more often than not historically. And yeah, they've had a transition with a bunch of new players coming in and a new head coach. So I do think there's a little bit of that too. Like, I mean, I said this on the broadcast, Adam, but one of the players said to me, like, we have the talent that we used to have. We just don't have the chemistry. And I think they've got a new coach that's kind of finding his voice and looking for the right buttons to push, and, varying availability and whatnot. Like, it's a transition time for Carolina, kind of like New York. And the reality is, though, like, if you don't figure out who you are quick, you're going to be at best competing for the third playoff spot in your division.
The
So
mar-
the time is of the essence.
I was just gonna say the margins are so slim this year. It's just like you lose more than one game in a weekend and it feels like you put your season out on the plank, right? Like it's remarkable how much each of these results in any given game are going to be determinant later in the season. Again, given the hot starts of the Oaklands, the Philadelphias, these teams that we were hopeful for, but I don't think expected to arrive quite this quickly. You know, you talk about Minnesota last season sort of coming a little bit earlier than their expected by date. I feel like there are
Yeah.
several teams this year that are starting to do that and showcase that.
Can I ask you a South Division question real quick?
Shoot.
How did what San Diego put on the field over four
Oh.
quarters against Atlanta change the way you thought about the Growlers, impact the way you thought about the South Division race?
If anything, it mollified all of my hype for the Growlers coming into this year, right? Like you saw what they're capable of. I mean, other than Dean Ramsey going complete Sports Center mode to reel in the Hail Mary at the end of regulation, you know, that felt kind of like the Growlers took every bit of Atlanta's best punches and were right there with them for four quarters. And it's exactly the kind of program that we've been talking about Kevin Stewart and Kayla Helton building for a while now. You know, the consistency of Travis Dunn is showcased in a matchup like this. This San Diego team, they bite down on you and they don't let go. I was talking with a West Division player. You know, San Diego used to be aligned in the West Division, now in the South. And I appreciate you saying it's a South Division question to start this discussion. I was talking with a West Division player, and they were saying before the game even started, I wouldn't be surprised if Growlers win this one. They're not going to go away, and they're going to irritate the hell out of Atlanta. And especially in these kind of one-off, first-ever meeting scenarios, you just know that the Growlers are going to come with A, a good game plan, and B, four quarters of energy. And that's exactly what you saw. And I mean, how about Khalif El Salam? You know, he kind of took the opposite direction of, I feel like, Antoine, you were mentioning a few minutes ago, you know, and what they kind of are coming into the season with, you know, energy after getting spurned in the World Games tryout process. I think Antoine has taken it one direction and Khalif is sort of in the opposite mode where he's, you know, you talk about proving it. Khalif is proving it right now. And he was carrying that Growlers team for points at a time against Atlanta and just fatiguing himself with just the level of exertion he was putting out there every single given point. Again, I was high on him coming into this season, getting back on this Growlers roster, knowing that franchise and that organization well, having spent time with them before. But now having seen him against, you know, a former team and having some motivation, I think, you know, it bears the mentioning that he looks like a possible kind of MVP guy when he showcases his ability to play on both sides of the disc and just dominate against a good team like Atlanta as he did throughout that game. I mean, again, I've got all the superlatives for this Growlers roster. I just hope that they can cash in on some wins and not sort of sit on the odd side of schedule and standings and, you know, be out of luck for the playoffs.
Well, they're going to have opportunities. You know,
Yeah.
they should beat LA at home this weekend. It would be stunning if they don't. Then they got likely an 0-2 doubleheader at Atlanta, at Carolina. It's actually at the Flyers first, and then at Atlanta. That's, I mean,
No,
maybe
hold on. You say
Stop.
likely 0-2
Yes.
Growlers
Yes.
there, but a moment ago you were just saying Carolina going to Pittsburgh and Philadelphia were kind of debatable. I think the same sort of debate bears out for this Growlers team going to Carolina. I understand that the hustle Flyers back-to-back is one of the most difficult in the association, but just hear me out. Like, don't you think that that's worth it? Don't you think the Growlers can maybe make some noise in Carolina?
I mean, maybe.
Maybe.
I mean, they'll make noise. They'll be an active, loud sideline. They'll bring the energy.
Bark no bite.
No, look, I was just getting ready to salute a lot of their like supplementary players, like guys that aren't Khalif or Travis Dunn or KJ Koo or Marcel Osborne, but like Ollie Artis is having a really nice start to the season. Stefan Samu, I've always been a fan of. Feel
Oh,
like he's always been a really good playmaker for them. Like they've got guys to fill out the roster. I mean, Max Hume is a really solid veteran who's been in the league for a long time. So I like the San Diego team. I don't think it's that controversial. And really, I'm just like projecting, even if they go 0-2 at Carolina and at Atlanta, which at the least it's plausible, right? You could imagine a world where San Diego goes 0-2 at those two games. Then there's 3-3 with Houston and Austin at home, at Vegas, Oakland, LA, Oakland. Like, obviously the Spiders games are tough, and the Austin game at home is no gimme for sure. But like, they could be 3-3 and still very much in the mix, I think was my point, rather than me saying, oh, they have no chance to win at Carolina, Atlanta. I was saying, I think as long as they take care of business in the games that they're supposed to win, they're going to have opportunities to be there at the end. And they've, if you can play Atlanta tight for 4 quarters, you can play anybody tight for 4 quarters.
Look, I was just trying to kick around your transitive property on competitive teams, and Carolina seemed like a good case test for how everything stacks up. So that was only my questions around Growlers going into that road trip.
I also think that like going on the road for a doubleheader is still, even in 2025, really, really hard. And I hope that came across in the Tuesday toss that I wrote when I was like projecting first losses. Like, I think Colorado's got a really good chance to beat Austin, but in projecting their first loss, like second day of a back-to-back, 100 degrees, the Austin Soul fresh and hungry and trying to make a statement at home in front of their fans, like it should be a great game, but you can't just pencil in a victory there for a Colorado team, even if you think they're really good. Now, we'll see. We've, every year teams do win both games in these hard road trips, and it's a season-defining moment. I mean, we saw that last year when Seattle went down to SoCal and swept a SoCal doubleheader, I think for the first time since like 2015 or maybe the first time ever. These road doubleheaders, I just want to give them their respect. And, what New York's going to do this weekend at Boston, at Montreal. Boston has a little bit different because they're at home and then going to D.C. on Sunday. And we should spend a minute on that game before we sign off because, Boston, not only do they have to worry about New York, they have a D.C. team that seems to be finding its form. Like, what were your thoughts watching the Breeze this past weekend? And do you feel that do you still have questions about the Breeze, or are you pretty confident that D.C. is going to be, in it at the end as an East Division playoff team?
It's DC, so I do expect them to just be in it at the end. Like, they've just got too much talent, and when that offense is clicking as it was against Carolina, how do you have doubt in this team, in almost any matchup? I mean, when, again, it's Nissen and Aroy setting up the table and Boxley, Timon, and the rest just cashing in, drive out. It's about as efficient as an offense as it gets. And so when you have that, and especially given that this year offense seems to be kind of the prevailing meta win condition, it's hard to put doubt in a Breeze team when they're firing on all cylinders. I think the biggest thing is, can their defense prove a little bit more reliable in converting on counterattacking opportunities? I think that when DC hits their true ceiling, it's when the offense is just its efficient machine-like self, and the defense is causing some ruckus and getting 5 or more break scores in a game. So far this year, Breeze are still kind of struggling to establish themselves defensively and in coverage, and I do really feel like they're experiencing the loss of, Troy Holland in particular, just what he brought as a disruptive force in coverage. I think that they're still kind of searching for, despite returning Musa Ja, Alexander Fall, and some others to their lineup. But yeah, I think that DC looks really good. And again, it's kind of how much can DC dictate to their one-on-one matchups on offense versus how much can Boston do so on the other side. DC will obviously be fresh. It's their only game of the weekend, while Boston will have one day in between their Friday matchup against New York and then their away game at DC on Sunday. What I'm trying to get at is that I think that Boston needs to do what it's been doing against Montreal in winning one-on-one matchups. I don't know that they can do that reliably on defense against this Breeze offense.
Yeah, I mean, we will see. I think one interesting thing about DC, and talked about this a little bit on the broadcast, but chatting with Lauren Boyle, the coach of the Breeze, before the game, I asked, because clearly, like, they're trying to have Thomas Edmonds play a little bit more offense and be kind of an anchor for their is kind of do what he's done for their D line in past years. And I asked, like, what dictates whether Thomas plays O or D, and I think in Coach Boyle's mind, she is trying to build the D line offense structure around the other guys and trying to empower AJ Merriman and Isaac Lee and Alexander Fall and Charlie McCutcheon and other guys like that to, be the solid distributors they can be. But none of those guys are the quarterbacks that Thomas Edmonds is. So, like, that's still something they're still getting sorted out. You mentioned Musa Ja, and I was like, yeah, it was strange seeing it. Like, I got thrown off when Musa Ja was out there playing offense. Played 12 of his 13 points on O, and I think I misidentified him as Christian Boxley, just because Musa hasn't played a lot of offense historically for the Breeze. He's played a little bit, but more certainly about three quarters to 80% of his points have been on D. So, like, that surprised me. And yeah, I'm with you in trying to think about what DC's D-line counterattack's going to look like. They've got some questions to answer. But yeah, their offense looked really good. Oh, one minor piece of quasi-breaking news that I feel like I'm not going to offend anybody by throwing out into the ether at the end of the show and just get your thoughts on it. This has a good chance of being the last season in the league for Rowan McDonald. Chatting with Rowan after the game on Saturday, and he kind of was talking that like it was going to be his last go through, and I asked him directly, and he's like, probably. This is probably it. And he said, hopefully I can go out with a championship. So that's just something that I'm going to store in the back of my mind about this DC team. Like, very rarely in sports do you get to go out in a glorious way to finish your career. And with the way things went at championship weekend last year for the Breeze, and, obviously, like, they lose Johnny Monks this year, but get Christian Boxley back. Like, there's just a lot of interesting circumstances. But the fact that, Rowan didn't say definitely, but just my hunch says that barring something changing, this has a really good chance of being Rowan's last year in the league. And he's been a foundational piece for this franchise since he joined in 2016. I mean, he's played almost every game. He was the MVP in 2018.
Correct.
Thank you. I knew you would know. So yeah, it's just, something that, like, it's not worth like a big breaking news headline, but for the diehards that are listening this deep into the pod, it's an interesting nugget about where his mind is at, and kind of this could be the last hurrah for the Breeze with Rowan on the O-line.
Well, and I think that perfectly describes some of the waywardness we're feeling with this eminently talented DC team, right? I mean, they're coming off of a semifinals finish last year. They finally break through to championship weekend, and yet there's sort of this like bittersweet tinge to the start of the season, given that they lose their home opener to Philly, and now there's sort of this emerging news that their franchise pillar for the last decade is maybe not going to retire at the end of this year. So I think it's perfectly apt that you sort of report on that and that we touch on it, because I think that's a huge motivating force for this DC team, and kind of, again, perfectly describes where they're at, which is sort of in transition, a little bit of limbo, despite, again, having all these pieces. Again, it just kind of comes back to the theme of what we're going towards week 4 with, which is prove it, right? Like, what does this DC team have if this is the final run for a UFA legend?
Yeah, and they got a lot of tough games coming up, and starting Sunday at home against Boston. Just real quick, I'm not holding you to anything, but like look at the East Division standings and tell me what you think like the top 4 is going to look like after this weekend. The only thing we know for sure is that Philly is 3-0 and Toronto is 0-3. Where do
Right.
Boston, DC, New York, and Montreal slot in on Sunday night?
Oh, man. I think I got to take Boston on Friday against New York. It just feels like between the talent and the, I would say, momentum of that matchup, it's all in the Glory's favor, and they're at home. And then I think that they then turn around and lose it on the road against DC, kind of the similar results as last year's East Division playoff bracket, where Boston wins the first round matchup and then goes and loses in DC in the East Division title game. It's kind of where my mind is at entering week 4. But if you
that
told me
seems likely and reasonable. Home teams win Friday and Sunday.
Yeah, I think that there's always that home advantage. But again, it's like, when are we really going to light this candle? When's going to be the result that really just makes this season chaotic in a way that we haven't foreseen yet? Because I feel like
could be Saturday in Montreal, Adam. Could be Saturday in Montreal.
I mean, we haven't even really touched on the Colorado road trip. I mean, we've sort of been mentioning it, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that a little bit more expanded if you have a moment.
I got nothing but time. I think, when we watch Madison go through Houston and Austin a couple weeks ago, it was my opportunity to learn a little bit more about the Havoc, and I don't think, barring something crazy, Houston can stay with Colorado and all their elite talent from Atkins to Feiner to Kuhlman. Keenan Lawrence making his Summit debut this weekend. First game in the
Really
league for
excited.
him since 2023. Yeah, excited about that. So I expect Colorado to win at Houston on Friday night, even though like Houston's not that far away. Every time I watch them, they just shoot themselves in the foot 3 times a quarter in ways that you can't do if you want to be a really good team in the league. And like they know that. Like that's not breaking news to them. That shouldn't be offensive to them. Like they know that is their issue. And at some point, maybe they solve it and put 2, 3, 4 quarters together. But I'd be surprised if it's Friday night against Colorado. As for Saturday, man, I don't have a great perspective, especially now in my life, about what it's like on your body to play back-to-back days when it's 100 degrees or even when it's 90 degrees. So I want to veer to you, how big of an advantage is it for Austin with the heat being what it is and them being fresh and Colorado having played the night before? Because honestly, if this was too
expert, I'm nothing but a Midwest humble boy. I don't know about that Texas heat, man. You're asking the. I think
you're younger than me. You're in better shape than me. You're more muscular than me.
I'm like 18 months younger than you, if that. So I don't know about the whole my younger skin can feel the temperature better. But to your point, I think that it's going to be a big thing to watch for. I just think of all the teams in the association who might be able to tackle that challenge and who have the kind of ego to just push past it. It might be this Colorado squad. I think that they've kind of been licking their chops, looking at what's going on in the rest of the league, especially with Oakland and their sort of run up the standings in the West. And I think the Summit have been biding their time a bit, waiting to get back atop the West Division since they sort of abdicated their throne after the 2022 season. We highly anticipated them as being a championship contender basically up through their regular season loss against the Empire in 2023, and ever since then it's kind of been this tumultuous time for a very talented team. And I think that they sort of sense the moment here. Like if they go down to Texas, get a 2-0 sweep against interdivisional teams and come back with their own 3-0 record, start their West Division schedule in earnest, like I think that they have a tremendous, opportunity here. And on the flip side, I think it's very similar for Austin. They're one of these teams that, given all the movement in the offseason, we discounted a bit coming into 2025. And Jackson Potts, Kyle Henke, Miles Armstrong, and this sort of new look soul attack are just flourishing, admittedly against a Houston team that's still struggling to figure out its defensive coverages. But the Austin offense is flourishing, and I think that it just sets up this matchup where I kind of expect it to push north of 50 total goals. Like, I think that this could be a real big shootout on the offensive side of the disc.
It's funny because I had 50 in my mind too, but I was thinking this is a 50-50 game in my mind. Like, if Austin missing Joey Wiley is a big deal. I mean, I don't need to tell you, he's a really, really good player for them. Thankfully, it's like a life conflict and not an injury. When you see someone that you usually see playing every game not active, you worry about that. And, life conflicts happen for everybody over the course of the season, and every team has to deal with them in some way, form, or another. But, I think Colorado has the higher ceiling. But Austin, I expect to be very competitive. I also think about what happened last year when Colorado went and faced two Central Division teams on the road at Madison and in Minnesota. And, those two games were incredibly humbling for the Summit because they felt like they were out-schemed in those games, or out-UFA'd by teams that just utilized the pro ultimate rule set better and had better timing with their double teams and just mixed and matched things that made the small differences on the margin. So, I mean, I know that's something that Colorado's really focused on in the preseason and getting ready, but Steven Najee's got that Central Division mentality coming from Indy. He's going to have the soul doing all sorts of quirky things. I'm sure Najee's got his laminated game sheet with 8 different lines ready to do.
What's a laminated game sheet? What's a laminated game sheet? And I'm interested to actually know, got to say about Quinn Finer, because that to me was the big question mark hanging over, Colorado's road trip through the Central Division last year, especially given that those are some pretty tight results. I mean, I think that Quinn Finer for this Colorado team is worth a 3 to 4 goal margin, particularly for what he does on their offense. I really think that him being in this matchup is something that, Najee can game plan all game or all day and all night. There isn't really a replica for what Finer brings to this Colorado attack. And Danny Landisman is back in this lineup. It's really going to be a thing to watch in the West Division playoff hunt, how he comes back from the injury. I think, if we get 80% plus of where Landisman was before his injury, I think that transformed Colorado into a different kind of team. I think that there's so much to watch for in this Colorado and Austin matchup. I am just licking my chops for this whole slate going into week 4.
Yeah. Texas heat is different, though. The laminated sheet won't do anything to stop Quinn Finer necessarily. But if it's 101 degrees opening pull and they play the night before, frankly, I
hope that's graded plastic, otherwise it's going to start melting in that heat. It sounds like on those laminated sheets.
Najee's laminated sheets are only the finest plastics in the land. No, don't worry about that. Colorado, I'm looking at their roster right now. They're also missing. I mean, I said they're missing Tobias Brooks. I may have said that, but no Zeke Thorson, no Nonaman Fink. Basically, the college guys not playing because College Nationals is a week away. You get that. It's this is not the best version of Austin, but it's a good enough version of Austin to create problems for Colorado. And I stand by 50-50. and I lean towards the home team just because they're at home. But yeah, you're absolutely right about Colorado changing their narrative this weekend if they can go to Texas and just rampage through both the Havoc and the Soul.
One more point about Colorado, too. You had mentioned earlier in the episode how Boston was just salivating at the idea of adding in all of their collegiate talent. You look at this lineup of Summit collegiate stars who are going to be injected in a couple of weeks, and you don't tell me that this Summit team is tuned up thinking if they come out 2-0 after week 4 and they get to put in Tobias Brooks, Zeke Thorson, Elliot Hawkins, I forgot, is on this Summit team now. Really interesting thrower. Nonaming Fink, Seth Wells. Like, this Colorado team is going to get a nitrous boost from all this young talent. And if they have, anywhere near an undefeated record, what is that going to add to it,
What's a nitrous boost, Adam? I'm not cool enough to know. What does that do to your body?
You don't watch Fast and the Furious, Evan? Come on. I know you're not that old.
Never seen it.
Oh, it's like cars, man. It's the thing that makes your car go faster. I don't know. I'm not that much of a mechanic head.
You're a chemistry guy. I understand. If Colorado gets through this weekend undefeated, there's a roadmap for them to be undefeated into July. They'd have to beat Oakland at home. They have to win at Seattle. They have to beat Vegas at home when the Bighorns typically are good at elevation. This is what happens when you go for about 80 minutes on a podcast. You get a little loopy. I think the Colorado Summit, they're going to be in the mix regardless of what happens this weekend. They can make a huge statement with 2 straight wins, and it's very easy to envision the Summit as the last remaining undefeated team in the league if they get through this weekend unscathed.
Yeah, but once again, we're getting way ahead of ourselves because week 4 is going to offer a lot for us to consider. Week 3 already did. Week 2 certainly did. Week 1 did. I'm only
Adam, if you could only watch one game this weekend, which game would you pick?
I think I go blind instead, man. I can't narrow it down to just one. That's kind of what I'm talking about. I mean, could you choose just one matchup out of this slate? I mean, even between just New York at Boston and Chicago and Minnesota, that's a complete coin flip as to where my interests lie. And I think that I'm almost more internally excited to see this Summit and Soul first ever matchup. Like, I just think that the personalities and the playmaking that are going to collide in that is going to be must-see TV. I truly think that this is going to be one of the most exciting weekends the entire 2025 regular season has to offer.
I agree. And, I have the fortune of calling Boston, New York. So I'll say that would be my pick.
Boston.
And I'll be at my cousin Noah's wedding on Saturday night. So I will be trying not to be rude while watching games on my phone as best as I can, which obviously I will be doing because that's who I am. But it's going to be a great weekend. Look forward to recapping it all with you sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you can tune in and watch Friday Night Frisbee on the UFA YouTube channel. That'll do it for this episode of Swing Pass heading into week 4. We're out for now. Bye.